Hi, baby birds. Welcome back to the next part in our series of getting through this book without absolutely trying to bash our heads in. Okay, so we left off at Megan's story. Megan broke up with her boyfriend twice before getting pregnant in her first year of college. Although her boyfriend wanted to get married, the relationship never felt right. Her family pushed her to marry him, right? So we remember all of that. So basically since childhood, Megan had been trained to think that her natural desire to feel special and loved was selfish. And throughout her marriage, her husband reinforced this by telling her that she just wanted too much and her expectations were too high, until she stopped believing that he knew more about her than she did. What a revelation. So let's explore that. Lacking self-confidence due to parental rejection. When parents reject or emotionally neglect their children, these children often grow up to expect the same from other people. They lack confidence that others could be interested in them. Instead of asking for what they want, their low self-confidence makes them shy and conflicted about seeking attention. They're convinced that they would be bothering others if they tried to make their needs known. Unfortunately, by expecting past rejection to repeat itself, these children end up stifling themselves and promoting more emotional loneliness. I did that constantly as a minor. I did that constantly for the adults around me growing up. Really, the only place where I was allowed minimally to emotionally lash out at all or experience any form of anger was when I moved into my adopted parents' home, but they came in bursts. It was full autistic meltdown at that point whenever it could come out, and then it would just make my adopted mom cry and act like she was scared of me, like she was genuinely scared of me. There was a point where I was like 15 or 16 or something, and I think my adopted dad left on a missions trip for a little while, and I remember feeling like a predator in the house, even though I would never want to harm anybody. That's not in my nature, never has been, to want to hurt people. But the way that she made me feel was that my anger was so intense and so overwhelming that she, as a grown adult in the house with a teenager, didn't feel safe with me. And I laugh now because that's ridiculous, and also such a horrible way to react to a very clearly abused child being emotional with you. If anything, that meant that I trusted you enough to allow you to see my real self when I was being authentically raw, and you just said, "Oh, you're dangerous." You replied with, "You're dangerous," to a teenager, being a fully grown woman in her 40s, 50s. Yikes. Anyway. In this situation, people create their own emotional loneliness by hanging back instead of interacting. As a therapist, my job is to help them realize how their parents have damaged their self-confidence while also encouraging them to tolerate the anxiety of trying something new in order to connect more with others. As the next two stories show, people are capable of doing this. It just may not occur to them to reach out because they simply don't have much experience with other people helping them feel better. Here's Ben's story. Ben had suffered from anxiety and depression for a majority of his life. He characterized his mother as a rejecting woman who kept him at an arm's length. She was imperious and had made it clear that he held a low place in the family pecking order. As a child, Ben's needs and feelings were simply just not a primary concern, and he was expected to wait until the adults were ready to pay attention to him. Fortunately, Ben married a kind and affectionate woman, Alexa. But he was baffled as to why she had chosen him. As he put it, "I'm not a very interesting person. I don't know why Alexa likes me. I'm not exactly a nobody," but the way Ben's voice trailed off indicated that he saw himself as someone who could easily be overlooked and taken for granted. Ben's childhood experience of his mother's rejection had clearly deflated his self-confidence. Further, it had convinced him that others would find his emotional needs as repugnant as his mother did. One day, during a session, Ben talked about how unhappy and overwhelmed he was feeling. When I asked if he'd confided in Alexa about how he was feeling, he said, "No, I can't. She's got her own stuff to deal with. I don't want her to see me as this wuss who can't deal with his own issues." When I said it seemed unlikely that Alexa would do that, he agreed. "I know she loves me for just being myself, but I don't feel that way about myself." When I suggested to Ben that he could try opening up to Alexa, given how supportive she was, he told me he thought he should be more self-reliant, saying, "I should be able to weather this on my own. Isn't it up to me to meet my own emotional needs?" What a lonely thought. I told Ben that we all need other people to meet our emotional needs for comfort and closeness. That's what relationships are all about. And listen, that's the tea, Mary. Okay? Stop letting these boss girls, these boss babes, get online and tell you that you can't love anybody until you love yourself. That's absolutely not fucking true, and I'm living proof of it. I came into my current self as a husk of a human because I had been rejected, neglected, and not loved. Just not loved at all. And when I met my current partner, it changed. He not only loved me, but befriended me and taught me how to see myself. And without his help and companionship and encouragement, I wouldn't have learned how to find better friends, how to make deeper connections with people that I meet, how to decipher who's gonna take advantage of me and who's gonna fucking be there for me. Like, without stumbling across people who are genuinely gonna just see you and want that, and not the weird facade you have to put on for everyone else to find you palatable, you need companionship. Human beings, we don't survive on our own. We just don't. There's the rare, hermit that thrives on their lonesomeness, but even hermits get lonely. Okay? You can't do it all on your own. You can't carry it all by yourself. You also can't push it all onto one person. That you cannot do. You gotta have a connection, a network. And even if it's only 2 or 3 people, fine. But don't think that you're gonna be able to push yourself through the ocean of life with one life ring under your arm. You can't. You won't make it. Your other arm's gonna give out. You gotta have full support. You gotta have someone arm in arm with you on both sides. And you got to be there for them too. It's not about carrying each other. It's about leaning while the other needs to gain their strength back as you walk on this path through life. You can't do it by yourself. You just can't. Okay. I'll get off my soapbox and get back to the story. Here's Charlotte's. Charlotte provides another example of this tendency to see current situations through the lens of past parental rejection. She had finally accepted a friend's repeated invitations to enter a short story in a writing contest. She was sure the judges would reject her work, even though she was a successful newspaper journalist. To her astonishment, she won. For Charlotte, this stirred up painful memories of all the times in childhood when she was criticized and shamed by her parents for trying to stand out. Her parents were not capable of emotional support and instead found reasons to disparage her accomplishments. And now, even as she was thrilled about her award, she simultaneously felt terrified that someone would step forward to mock her or expose her as undeserving. Instead of sharing her happiness with everyone, she just kept it to herself, telling herself no one was interested. Childhood loneliness beneath adult success. Parental rejection doesn't always result in low self-confidence. Some intelligent, resilient people somehow manifest the confidence to pursue good careers and reach high levels of achievement. Many find emotionally mature partners, enjoy satisfying long-term relationships, and create close families of their own. But despite their emotional needs being met in current relationships, the lingering trauma of childhood loneliness may haunt them in other ways through anxiety, depression, or even bad dreams. This is Natalie's story. Natalie, 50, an award-winning business consultant, was an emotionally neglected child who nevertheless created a rewarding adult life for herself, both personally and professionally. Unfortunately, the emotional neglect she experienced as a child still haunts her in the form of dreams, which she described like this: I have recurring nightmares with the same theme. I'm in a desperate situation that I can't get out of. I'm trying frantically to find a solution, a way out. Different roads, different keys, different doors. None of them are a solution. I'm all alone, and there's only me trying to solve the problem. There's no one else. Lots of times I'm responsible for other people who are watching and waiting for me to fix everything, but here they give me no help. There's no comfort to be found. I have no protection, and I'm not safe. Then I wake up and my heart is racing. Natalie's dream captures what it feels like to be emotionally alone. She has to deal with everything by herself and doesn't consider asking anyone for help. This is how children of emotionally immature parents feel. Their parents may technically be present, but they offer little help, protection, or comfort. In her family life, Natalie still takes care of her elderly mother, who lives with Natalie and her husband and kids. But no matter how much Natalie does, her mother still complains that Natalie has never loved her or helped her enough. Since childhood, Natalie has felt the responsibility for her mother's emotional state. Meanwhile, Natalie was on her own because her mother wasn't a person she could turn to. Children like Natalie often grow up as little adults, helping their parents, giving them no trouble, and appearing to need practically nothing. These capable kids may seem like they can parent themselves, but they can't. No child can parent themselves. They just learn to cling to whatever emotional scraps they get because any connection is better than none at all. Yet, who would guess Natalie's early insecurities as she strides into meetings, all business in her impeccable suits? She has a good marriage, successful children, and close friendships. She knows how to relate to people from all walks of life, and her emotional intelligence is off the charts. Natalie's dreams pull back the curtain to reveal the emotional loneliness that remains with her. Despite creating a fulfilling adult life, inside she remains vulnerable to anxieties about being alone and unsupported. Not until she was nearly 50 did she begin to understand how her relationship with her mother fueled her underlying feelings of anxiety. That was one of the most meaningful discoveries of her life. Finally, she saw the reason for her nightmares. You know, what's interesting is I feel that if my adopted mother specifically hadn't fallen down the same path as or not the same path, I guess, or went down the path that her mother succinctly wanted for her. Succinctly? Wow. Her mother wanted her to be a good woman of faith who was a stay-at-home wife and a mom, you know, all that stuff. She really did do everything in her power to make her parents proud. Like really did a lot. She joined the service the same as her dad. She became a nurse, which was a very a respected position. So her mother was proud. She married a good pastor. She didn't give herself body and soul to anybody until she was like 26, until she met her husband. She did everything right, and yet she still ended up emotionally failing her kids in a lot of ways. And it was genuinely just because she just didn't get a proper example. She just didn't get a good example. She had to deal with quite a few traumas in her life, and I think it's why it manifests in her anxiety and insomnia today, because she had to take care of her entire family. She was the oldest of 5. Her parents fought like crazy until they finally broke up, but it wasn't until she was like older. I think she was close to 18 or something when her parents finally decided to split up. And then her mom just melted, just fell apart. And then they lost her younger brother. So it was like she went through so many things, but she had to carry the family. And because of that, she didn't have time to learn how to be emotionally available for other people. She was like, I can't deal with anybody else's emotions. I'm barely dealing with my own. I have a family to keep together. So it does make a lot of sense why she ended up being the way she is, but it still just bums me out that not once you thought, maybe I should go give this therapy thing a try. But that was also their generation. They were taught that therapy was only for crazy people. So, I don't know. Guess I'll never know. Why it feels so bad to live without emotional connection. There's a reason why people have such a strong need for emotional connection with others. Throughout human evolution, being part of a group has always meant more safety and less stress. Our ancestors, who must have disliked separation, were more likely to survive because they joined and enjoyed safe feelings of being around and being close to others. Early humans who didn't mind isolation, on the other hand, may have been comfortable with more distance than was good for their survival. So when you're longing for a deep emotional connection, remind yourself that your painful feeling of aloneness is coming not just from your individual history, but also from a human genetic memory. Just like you, our distant ancestors had a strong need for emotional closeness. Your need for attention and connection is as old as the human race. You have prehistoric reasons for not liking being lonely. Summary. A lack of emotional intimacy creates emotional loneliness in both children and adults. Period. Attentive and reliable emotional relationships are the basis of a child's sense of security. Unfortunately, emotionally immature parents are usually too uncomfortable with closeness to give their children the deep emotional connection that they need. Parental neglect and rejection in childhood can adversely affect self-confidence and relationships in adulthood, as people repeat old, frustrating patterns and then blame themselves for not being happy. Even adult success doesn't completely erase the effects of parental disconnection earlier in life. Understanding how your parents' emotional immaturity has affected you is the best way to avoid repeating the past in your adult relationships. To that end, in this next chapter, we're going to look at the hallmark characteristics of emotionally immature parents. Chapter 2, recognizing the emotionally immature parent. We're coming for you. Okay. I'm actually going to take a second and get some water. And get some coffee. Okay, here we go. It can be hard to look at your parents objectively because it might feel like you're betraying them. But that isn't the motive here. In this book, our mission is not to disrespect or betray your parents, but to finally just see them objectively as human beings. I hope you'll see that the discussions of emotionally immature parents in this book are informed by a deep understanding of the reasons for their limitations. As you'll see, much of their immature, hurtful behavior is unintentional. By viewing these and other aspects of your parents more dispassionately, you can understand things about yourself and your history that you might not have thought about before. Now, I'm going to call myself out just within the first paragraph here already. I'll admit there were too many times in my teenhood where I blamed my adopted mother for acting maliciously toward me in her behavior. Now, there are things that she did do that I felt were of malicious intent, and I think I'm right on that. Hard stop. But there are lots of other things that I thought she was doing on purpose that really were just me projecting what my birth mother had done to me, because she would genuinely do things to make me sad. She loved to make me cry, and it was really weird. But my adopted mother did not love to make me cry. She loved to embarrass me. There were quite a few things that she enjoyed just saying out loud that were completely unnecessary in front of people that should not know personal things about me to that extent. And she would just do it anyway. And it can be as unintentional as you want to say it is. She of course won't remember it or recall the situation, but that's because it wasn't traumatic for her. But when I saw that smirk on your face after you said what you said, that told me that I'm not safe with you emotionally. So you stopped knowing me. Anyway, but you can absolutely project that onto people. I project that shit onto people all the time, where I think that their intention behind what mistake they made was purposeful, that they wanted to be mean to me. And that's usually not the case. People aren't that wrapped up on you. Okay. Most signs of emotional immaturity are beyond a person's conscious control, and most emotionally immature parents have no awareness of how they've affected their children. We aren't trying to blame the parents, but to understand why they are the way that they are. My hope is that any new insights about your parent you gain from reading this book will have the result of radically increasing your own self-awareness and emotional freedom. Fortunately, as adults, we have the ability and independence to assess whether our parents can really give us the care and understanding we desire. To judge this objectively, it's important to understand not just your parents' superficial behavioral characteristics, but also their underlying emotional framework. Once you understand these deeper traits and learn what to expect from your parents and how to label their behaviors, you're far less likely to be caught unaware by their limitations. Keep in mind that your thoughts about your parents are private. They may never know what you've gotten from this book, nor do they need to. The goal is for you to gain the self-confidence that comes from knowing the truth of your own story. You aren't betraying your parents by seeing them accurately. Thinking about them objectively does not hurt them, but it can help you. As you saw in the previous chapter, emotionally immature parents can have devastating impacts on their children's self-esteem and relationships in adulthood. The effects can range from mild to severe, depending on the parent's level of immaturity. But the net effect is the same. The children feel emotionally unseen and lonely. This erodes their children's sense of their own lovability and can lead to excessive caution about emotional intimacy with others. Okay, and this is an exercise. Assessing your parents' emotional immaturity. So, since I still have a set of parents that are alive, I'll go through this first with how it was with my birth mother instead of how it was with my adopted parents. Should I do that? No, I'll just judge them all. Okay. Human emotional immaturity has been studied for a long time. However, over the years, it's got lost, or no. It didn't get lost. It has lost. However, over the years, it has lost ground to an increasing focus on symptoms and clinical diagnosis, using a medical disease model to quantify behaviors as illnesses suitable for insurance reimbursement. But in terms of a deep understanding of people, assessing emotional immaturity is often far more useful, as you're likely to discover when reading the chapter and by completing this exercise. Read through the following statements and check any that describe your parent. If you'd like to fill out this assessment for more than one parent, you can use the downloadable version of this exercise available. Okay, that's cool. So here we go. I'm just going to read them and check them. My parent often overreacted to relatively minor things. That is true. My parents didn't express much empathy or emotional awareness. T. When it came to emotional closeness and feelings, my parents seemed uncomfortable and didn't go there. Yeah. My parent was often irritated by individual differences or different points of view. Oh yeah, big time. When I was growing up, my parent used to use me as a confidant, but was not a confidant for me. Yeah. My parent often said and did things without thinking about other people's feelings. Always doing it. I know what's best. I didn't get much attention or sympathy from my parents, except maybe when I was really sick. My parent was inconsistent, sometimes wise, but sometimes unreasonable. If I became upset, my parents either said something superficial and unhelpful, or they got angry and sarcastic. Conversations mostly centered on my parents' interests. Unless I forced my autistic facts on them, it was usually about whatever was going on in their lives. Even polite disagreement can make my parent very defensive. It was deflating to tell my parent about my successes because it didn't seem to matter. Facts and logic were no match for my parents' opinions. My parent wasn't self-reflective and rarely looked at their role in a problem. My parent tended to be a black and white thinker and unreceptive to new ideas. Wow, look at that, all aces. I checked every single one. For all y'all. I checked every single one because I thought of examples immediately as soon as I read each line. I had memories that, here you go, here you go, here you go. Yeah, check that. How many of these statements describe your parents? Since all these items are potential signs of emotional immaturity, checking more than one suggests you very well may have been dealing with an emotionally immature parent. Bitch, every single one. I checked every single one. Why do you think I'm so good at being able to mitigate and handle other people's emotions? Why do you think I'm so good at articulating how I feel? Because I was constantly and purposefully misunderstood. Personality pattern versus temporary emotional regression. There's a difference between a pattern of emotional immaturity and a temporary emotional regression. Anyone can briefly lose emotional control or become impulsive when tired or stressed out. And most of us have plenty to cringe about when we look back on certain moments in our lives. However, when a person has a personality pattern of emotional immaturity, certain behaviors show up repeatedly. And these behaviors are so automatic and unconscious that people are unaware of doing them. Emotionally immature people don't step back and think about how their behavior impacts others. There's no cringe factor for them, so they seldom apologize or experience regret. Must be nice. Before we explore emotional immaturity, let's take a look at emotionally mature functioning. Emotional maturity isn't a murky matter of opinion. It has been well and famously studied. Emotional maturity means a person is capable of thinking objectively and conceptually while sustaining deep emotional connections to others. People who are emotionally mature can function independently while also having deep emotional attachments, smoothly incorporating both into their daily life. They are direct about pursuing what they want, yet do so without exploiting others. They've differentiated from their original family relationships sufficiently to build a life of their own. They have a well-developed sense of self and identity and treasure their closest relationships. Emotionally mature people are comfortable and honest about their own feelings and get along well with other people thanks to their well-developed empathy, impulse control, and emotional intelligence. They're interested in other people's inner lives and enjoy opening up and sharing with others in an emotionally intimate way. When there's a problem, they deal with others directly to smooth out differences. Emotionally mature people cope with stress in a realistic, forward-looking way while consciously processing their thoughts and feelings. They can control their emotions when necessary, anticipate the future, adapt to reality, and use empathy and humor to ease difficult situations and strengthen bonds with others. They enjoy being objective and know themselves well enough to admit their weaknesses. Emotionally immature people, on the other hand, tend to have quite a different set of behavioral, emotional, and mental characteristics, because these personality characteristics are all interconnected. People who display one are often prone to the others. So in the sections that follow, we'll be briefly describing various characteristics of emotionally immature people. They are rigid and single-minded. As long as there's a clear path to follow, emotionally immature people can do very well, sometimes reaching high levels of success in their prestige. Prestige? Yeah, prestige, not prestige. But when it comes to relationships or emotional decisions, their immaturity becomes evident. They're either rigid or impulsive and try to cope with reality by narrowing it down to something manageable. Once they form an opinion, their mind is closed. There's one right answer, and they can become very defensive and humorless when people have other ideas. They have a low stress tolerance. Emotionally immature people don't deal with stress well. Their responses are reactive and stereotyped. Instead of assessing the situation and anticipating the future, they use coping mechanisms that deny, distort, or even replace reality. They have trouble admitting mistakes and instead discount the facts and blame others. Regulating emotions is difficult for them, and they often overreact. Once they get upset, it's hard for them to calm down, and they expect other people to soothe them by doing what they want. They often seek comfort in intoxicants or medication. They do what feels best. Young children are ruled by feelings, whereas adults consider possible consequences. As we mature, we learn that what feels good isn't always the best thing to do. Among emotionally immature people, however, the childhood instinct to do what feels good never really changes. They make decisions on the basis of what feels best in the moment and often follow the path of least resistance. If you're a mature person and think before you act, you might find it hard to imagine living by what feels good in the moment. So here's an example of the jaw-dropping behavior of the emotionally immature person. Anna convinced her brother Tom to come with her to talk to their elderly father about going into assisted living. After visiting with their father a bit, the time came to talk seriously. Suddenly, Tom was nowhere to be found. Anna searched the house and then looked out the front window in time to see her brother getting in his car and leaving. Anna was incredulous and wondered how Tom could run out like that. But when you realize that in that moment, walking out of the house felt much better than staying for a difficult confrontation, it makes sense. They're subjective, not objective. Emotionally immature people assess situations in a subjective way, not objectively. They don't do much dispassionate analysis. When they interpret situations, how they are feeling is more important than what's actually happening. What is true doesn't matter nearly as much as what feels true. Trying to get a subjectively oriented person to be objective about anything is an exercise in futility. Facts, logic, history all fall on deaf ears when the emotionally immature are concerned. They have little respect for differences. Emotionally immature people are annoyed by other people's differing thoughts and opinions, believing everyone should see things their way. The idea that other people are entitled to their own point of view is beyond them. They may be prone to making social gaffes because they don't have enough awareness of other people's individuality to avoid being offensive. They're only comfortable in role-defined relationships where everyone holds the same beliefs. The quieter, nicer ones are the same, but in a quieter, nicer way. Normal children are egocentric as youngsters, but the self-involvement of emotionally immature adults is more childish than childlike. Unlike children, their egocentrism lacks joy and openness. Emotionally immature people are self-preoccupied in an obsessive way, not with the innocence of a child. Young children are self-centered because they're still commanded by pure instinct, but emotionally immature adults are commanded by anxiety and insecurity, like wounded people who must keep checking their intactness. They live in a perpetual state of insecurity, fearing that they'll be exposed as bad, inadequate, or unlovable. They keep their defenses high so other people can't get close enough to threaten their shaky sense of self-worth. You know, if you think about it, that's actually probably why they treat their children so bad in the first place. Because they had this example of an emotionally immature parent. They had their own kids. And when their children act out of self-centeredness, they assume it and treat it like it was done on purpose. They treat their kids like they're getting to start over with their parents. But every time they make a mistake, instead of correcting the behavior and encouraging them to be better the next time, they lash out at them and punish them like they got punished. That has to be why people assume that their children are doing things out of selfish, malicious intent. Because children, they have no intent behind what they do. They're just going with whatever feels right. Okay. Before you start feeling too sorry for them, keep in mind that their defenses work seamlessly to keep these underlying anxieties below the level of awareness. They would never see themselves as being insecure or defensive. Anxious self-preoccupation is a quality all emotionally immature people share. They're constantly monitoring whether their needs are being met or whether someone has offended them. Their self-esteem rises or falls depending on how others react. They can't stand to be criticized, so they minimize their mistakes. Because their self-involvement is all-consuming, other people's feelings are eclipsed by their needs. For instance, after one woman told her mother how much it hurt to hear criticisms of her father, her mother said, "Well, if I couldn't tell you, I wouldn't have anybody to talk to." Terms like self-absorbed and narcissistic make it sound as if these people enjoy thinking about themselves all the time, but they really have no choice. They have fundamental doubts about their core worth as human beings. They are profoundly self-involved because their development was stunted by anxiety during childhood. In this way, their egocentrism is more like the self-preoccupation of someone with a chronic pain condition rather than someone who can't get enough of himself or herself or their self. Emotionally immature people are highly self-referential, meaning that in any interaction, all roads lead back to them. However, they aren't self-reflective. Their focus on themselves isn't about gaining insight or self-understanding. It's about being the center of attention. As you talk to them, self-referential people will turn whatever you say back to one of their own experiences, which is often misconstrued with autistic people and how they bring an example to the front whenever you're talking about an experience in order to relate to you. When someone usually is, it's not about one-upping you, it's not about comparing, it's about, oh, you experienced this thing, so did I. I can understand where you're coming from. Here is proof. So there's a difference. Someone offering you proof that they understand versus somebody trying to one-up you, bring the conversation back to them. Those who are more socially skilled might listen more politely, but you still won't hold their interest. They might not overtly change the subject, but they won't ask follow-up questions or express curiosity about the details of your experience. They're more likely to bring the conversation to a close with a pleasant comment that effectively ends it, such as, "That's wonderful, dear. I know you had a good time." Because they lack self-reflection, emotionally immature people don't consider their role in a problem. They don't assess their behavior or question their own motives. If they caused a problem, they dismiss it by saying that they didn't intend to hurt you. After all, you can't blame them for something they didn't mean to do, right? In this way, their egocentric focus remains on their intention and not the impact it had on you. Like children, emotionally immature people usually end up being the center of attention. In groups, the most emotionally immature person often dominates the group's time and energy. If other people allow it, all the group's attention will go to that person. And once this happens, it's hard to redirect the group's focus. If anyone else is going to get a chance to be heard, someone will have to force an abrupt transition, something many people just aren't willing to do. You may wonder whether these people are just being extroverted. They aren't. The difference is that most extroverts easily follow a change of topic, because extroverts crave interaction, not just an audience. They're interested and receptive when others participate. Extroverts do like to talk, but not with the purpose of shutting everybody else down. Role reversal is a hallmark of emotionally immature parenting. In this case, the parent relates to the child as if the child were the parent, expecting attentiveness and comfort from them. These parents may reverse roles and expect their child to be their confidant, even for adult matters. Parents who discuss their marriage problems with their children are an example of this kind of reversal. Other times, parents might expect their children to praise them and be happy for them, just as a child might expect that from a parent. One woman I worked with, Laura, remembered her father running off with another woman, leaving Laura, then just 8 years old, to cope with her severely depressed mother on her own. One day, Laura's father picked her up in a new convertible, giddy with excitement over his new toy. He expected her to be just as thrilled as he was, never considering the contrast between his joyful new life and the gloom that Laura lived in with her abandoned mother. Here's another example of a father who expected his daughter to function in an approving, almost parental role in spite of his past abuse of her. Frida, a woman in her late 30s, had grown up in a household dominated by fear. Her father, Martin, tended to express his emotional immaturity through physical aggression. Although he was an upstanding citizen at work and in public life, at home, he slapped his children and he beat them with a belt to the point of leaving marks. When Frida finally stood up to him as a teen, he stopped beating her, but he kept it up with her younger sister. He was also verbally demeaning to Frida's mother. Martin was an unpredictable man, sometimes impatient and angry, sometimes generous, happy, and loving, depending on how his day was going. But in general, rather than being a parent to his children, Martin expected them to soothe his feelings, make him the center of attention, and exhibit self-control. In a classic case of role reversal, he demanded their unconditional approval while he indulged in his own moods like a child. Frida was especially the target of this role reversal, with Martin clearly expecting her to show an almost maternal love and admiration for him. For example, after Frida had moved out to her own townhouse, Martin decided that she needed a porch swing, and not just any swing, but one he made himself from heavy lumber. Without asking, he had it delivered to her small deck, where it took up most of the space that she had to enjoy sitting outside. It was huge, it was impossible to move around, and it struck Frida as the perfect analogy for how Martin took up all of the space in the family. He was as proud of himself as a kid who had just presented his mother with an art project. Fortunately, after understanding her father's immaturity and the dynamics involved in their role reversal, Frida felt free to have the swing removed, restoring her deck to the way that she liked it. Impaired empathy is a central characteristic of emotionally immature people, as is avoidance of emotional sharing and intimacy. Being out of touch with their own deeper feelings, they're strikingly blind to how they make other people feel. Empathy isn't just a social nicety, like being tactful. It's a necessity for true emotional intimacy. You can't have a deep relationship without it. My favorite definition of empathy comes from infant attachment researchers Klaus and Karen Grossman and Anna Schwann, who described empathy as a sensitive mother's ability to see and to feel states and intentions from the baby's point of view. This definition includes being aware of both emotions and intentions. Beyond just sympathy, it entails correctly reading people's interests and how their will is being directed. The highest form of empathy requires an effort of imagination, which has been called mentalization, meaning the ability to imagine that other people have their own unique minds and thought processes. Developmental psychologists refer to this as having a theory of mind. Acquiring this ability is an important developmental milestone for children. Mentalizing allows you to grasp the other people's viewpoints and overall inner experience because you realize that they have a mind of their own, different from yours. Good parents are excellent at empathizing and mentalizing. Their interest in their child's mind makes the child feel seen and understood. It's also an indispensable characteristic for leadership in business, the military, or any situation where understanding and predicting the motives of others is central. Empathy is a bedrock component of emotional intelligence, which is essential to social and occupational success. In his conversations with the Dalai Lama, psychologist Paul Ekman distinguished between different types of empathy and compassion. True empathy involves more than knowing what people feel. It also entails the ability to resonate with those feelings. For example, sociopaths may do an excellent job of reading a person's emotional vulnerabilities, but without the ability to resonate with the other person's feelings, knowledge of those feelings becomes a tool for predation, not connection. This casts light on a curious fact about emotionally immature people. In spite of not resonating empathically, in spite of not resonating empathically, they are often quite canny when it comes to reading other people's intentions and feelings. However, they don't use their understanding of people to foster emotional intimacy. Instead, their empathy operates at an instinctual or superficially sentimental level. You may feel sized up, but not felt for. Lack of resonant empathy suggests a lack of self-development. For parents to accurately imagine what their children are feeling, they need to have enough self-development to be aware of their own emotions. If they haven't developed their own emotional self-awareness, they can't resonate with how others, including their own children, might feel. Why are there so many emotionally immature parents? Many of my clients have shared stories that reflect the emotional immaturity of their parents. For me, this begs the question of what could have caused so much emotional underdevelopment in so many parents. Based on my observations and clinical experience, it seems likely that the parents of many of my clients were emotionally shut down as children. As my clients and I have explored their family histories, they've often recalled evidence of great unhappiness and tension in their parents' early lives. Substance abuse, abandonment, loss, abuse, or traumatic immigration experiences hover in the family background, suggesting an atmosphere of loss, pain, and disconnection. Many people have told me that although they felt discounted or abused, it was nothing compared to the stories their parents told about their own childhood misery. Often, the relationship between a client's mother and maternal grandmother was conflictual and unsatisfying, even though that grandmother might have become a nurturing figure for the client. It seems that many of my clients' parents never had a supportive or emotionally intimate connection with their own parents, so they developed tough defenses to survive their own emotional loneliness early in life. It's so important to remember that old school parenting, the upbringing my clients' parents experienced, was very much about children being seen but not heard. Physical punishment was not only acceptable, it was condoned, even in schools, as a way to make children responsible. For many parents, spare the rod, spoil the child was considered conventional wisdom. They weren't concerned about children's feelings. They saw parenting as being about teaching children how to behave. It wasn't until 1946 that Dr. Benjamin Spock, in the original version of his megaseller, The Common Sense Book of Baby and Child Care, widely popularized the idea that children's feelings and individuality were important factors to consider in addition to physical care and discipline. In the generations before this shift, parenting tended to focus on obedience as the gold standard of children's development, rather than thinking about supporting children's emotional security and individuality. In the following stories, you can see the passed down effects of this old school parenting on my clients. Ellie, the oldest child in a large family, remembered her mother, Trudy, was a generous person, but hard as a rock. Trudy was active at church and in the community and had a reputation as being kind and helpful. But when it came to empathy for her children's feelings, she was impervious. Ellie had frequent nightmares and depended on a favorite stuffed animal to soothe her. One night, when Ellie was about 11 years old, her mother suddenly took her comforting stuffed animal and said, "I'm giving this away. You're too old for this." When Ellie begged her mother not to, Trudy told her she was being ridiculous. Although Trudy took good care of Ellie physically, she had no feeling for Ellie's emotional attachment to a precious toy. Ellie was also deeply attached to a cat who had been in the family since she was a toddler. One day when Ellie came home from school, Trudy announced that she'd given the cat away because it had messed in the house. Ellie was devastated, but as Trudy told Ellie years later, "We didn't give a damn about your feelings. We just kept a roof over your head." Sarah, whose mother was emotionally inhibited and standoffish, had a very strict upbringing. She remembers that her mother always seemed to be holding herself back emotionally, as if behind a great wall. But Sarah cherishes a memory of a morning when her mother stood quietly by her bed, fondly watching Sarah sleep before waking her up. Sarah was already partly awake, but she didn't move, so she could enjoy this moment of secret closeness with her mother. Once she was fully awake, the wall went right back up, and her mother kept a proper distance. Of course, emotionally immature parents were once children themselves, and as children, they may have had to shut down many of their deepest feelings in order to be acceptable to their own parents. It's likely that Ellie and Sarah's mothers also grew up with parental insensitivity toward their feelings. Many emotionally immature people were over-pruned early in life, growing up with a very limited range of acceptability. Their personalities are like stunted bonsai trees, trained to grow in unnatural shapes because they had to bend to fit their families. They were unable to develop fluidly into the integrated natural people that they might have become. It may be that many emotionally immature people weren't allowed to explore and express their feelings and thoughts enough to develop a strong sense of self and a mature individual identity. This made it hard for them to know themselves, limiting their ability to engage in emotional intimacy. If you don't have a basic sense of who you are as a person, you cannot learn how to emotionally engage with other people on a deep level. This arrested self-development gives rise to additional deeper personality weaknesses that are common among emotionally immature people, which will be outlined in the next part. But we're going to stop there for today. And I hope that going through this increment by increment has been helpful for you. Bye, baby birds.